Today we have Penny on the channel to talk about how to apply to history. Penny is a third-year history student studying at the University of Oxford, and we're really glad to have her on to the channel. How are you, Penny?
I'm doing great, and I'm really glad to be here.
Wonderful. So to get started off with, why are you studying history?
Well, I've always had a passion for research, and I really enjoyed studying history at school. But I was not sure that I wanted to do it at university. I was thinking of studying PP, and because I found it really kind of intriguing that I could do three subjects at the same kind of time ish. And I felt that, oh, maybe that is for me, especially kind of more uh professionally, because I didn't want to teach history. So I thought, okay, maybe I don't want to study history, because I just don't want to teach history. But then I did this summer camp actually here in Oxford, where I was studying PP, and I really enjoyed it. But I felt that I don't really get the same kind of satisfaction as I do when I'm studying history. And I looked a little bit more at the career paths I could potentially go, um, if I do study history, and I realized that it's much more broad than I thought, and that's why I chose history.
Ooh, you've opened up a lot of small tangents that we could go discuss, and we definitely will talk about all of them. So perhaps you've touched upon career options, and as you say, a lot of people who might be watching might be worried about studying history because they are concerned about the certain career paths which they may have. Can you share some of the career paths that someone who's studying history can go to?
Yeah, and as a disclaimer, I think I haven't had things figured out yet, and I've come to terms with it, and I can say, I'm okay. But there are so many options that people can go um, towards, and many different paths, just because history is very much something that develops your transferable skills. So you're working a lot with kind of your analytical skills, your critical thinking skills, and your project management slash leadership, just because the nature of the subject and how it's taught at Oxford is that you get an essay title every week, and you have to figure out how to tackle that very specific question, and do the reading, and then form an argument that is kind of answering the question, but not in a way that replicates what the current debate is saying. And I think that really sets you up for a number of career paths, including law, policy making. A lot of people go into consulting if you can't kind of work on your uh, quantitative skills as well. Um, but charities, working with charities, further research. A lot of people go and do masters. So that really it's a subject that gives you the freedom to be flexible about what you do and how you do it, just because you develop a range of transferable skills that employers are looking for.
So perhaps since you are a finalist right now, what is the path looking forward? I know it's difficult to say what's a long-term path, but at least looking forward for the next maybe 2-3 years. Are you going into masters, law, conversion tests, academia? What's the idea?
I'm actually doing a master's,
Ooh,
and I I've realized when I was doing my thesis, because I started working on my thesis over the summer, that I really enjoy research, but not to the extent that I want to go into academia. But it's more of a kind of a personal interest, I will say. I wouldn't kind of want to have it on a professional level. So I said I will do a master's, and I will kind of evolve my current research and do it for 1 more year, and I think then I'll be ready. Um, for the next steps, I'm not 100% sure, but I know that I want something a little bit fast paced, something that is gonna challenge me. I need it. I need a challenge, so I'm thinking it's something more corporate at the moment.
Hmm. That definitely sounds very interesting. Now, you talk a lot about your passion for research and research skills, and a love for research is something which going to Oxford is quite an important skill. Can you tell us a bit more about how you discovered that love for research as in high school, and how you developed those skills?
Yeah, I was a bit lucky in the sense that my high school history teacher was not your typical teacher where she's like, okay, this is the information, and you have to kind of memorize it. And I was studying. I'm from Cyprus, but I was studying A levels, and so I was following the British system. But my teacher was kind of letting us study some historians directly. Obviously, was very guided, but it was really interesting to see. Okay, this is what the A level kind of core syllabus says, but this and this historian are saying completely different things. And we got to debate this in class and we got to kind of talk about it. And I was like, this is so cool. And I felt that because I'm a very argumentative person, and always kind of try to differentiate myself from kind of what other people are saying. I felt that through research, I could kind of better understand the debate so as to kind of my own opinion.
That's definitely a very interesting way to get into research, and I guess having good teachers in high school is just so important. Now, turning to Oxford, and why you applied to Oxford in the first place, because a lot of people might be looking at UCAS and they're like, I don't know what 5 universities you put there. What made Oxford stand out as the first question, and perhaps as a tangent, how does the Oxford history kind of degree stand out to you?
Yeah, I think it had to do a lot with the summer school I did, just because I got to see and experience the city because it was a residential program. So I stayed here for a month because actually my school was really keen on me applying to Cambridge just because they didn't really have any experience with Oxford, but they did have experience with students applying to Cambridge. And yeah, they were really keen. And I kind of had to say, I really feel that I can see myself in Oxford for 3 years, and maybe that was also the case. That could have been the case for Cambridge because obviously you can only choose one for your undergraduate application. But I felt such creative freedom when I was here, um, and I don't know. There was something about the place that I said I instantly connected, and I was like, okay, this is it. I really want to be here for 3 years, and that's how I chose it. And I understand that people cannot always kind of come and stay, but there's so many virtual visits. There's so many there's so many ways you can get to know a place before you choose it. And Oxford does a great deal of kind of showing the reality of the place and everything for people to kind of see how it looks like.
So you've touched upon the idea of a summer course and getting to have a feel of the city. Perhaps in 3 words, as a bit of a challenge, how would you describe the vibe of Oxford and what parts of it stood out to you?
Okay, it's a bubble.
Mhm.
And it's it's slow paced
Mm,
compared to London, for example,
yeah.
I'll say. Uh, and I felt that I needed that for
Mm,
for my undergraduate study. I just wanted to be kind of a little bit cut off from the world, but still kind of close enough to London where if I wanted to kind of do something, because I like big cities and
mm.
every once in a while you want to like kind of go. Um, So I yeah, it's a little bit of a bubble because you get the college system, you get these very weird traditions we have. It's just nice for a short period of time.
Yes, that's for sure. Now talking a bit more about the history course, you talked a bit about how the vibe of the city and your feeling of the city brought you to apply to Oxford. Was there anything about the course, particularly the way it's taught, or any parts of history that you're studying which stood out to you?
Yeah, I felt I felt that I could do well in tutorial systems. I felt that it would be a teaching style that was going to really work with me, because I'm the type of person that if you invest in me personally, I think I can grow best. And I was very lucky that I think I was given a lot of attention by my professors, and say that retrospectively. And I really saw how the tutorial system helped me. And like reading about the tutorial system, I was like, okay, this is a learning environment I can really see myself in. I remember one term I was having tutorials just one-on-one, and I felt like it was such a turning point in my academic kind of path. But also, I knew from a very young age, when I was still in high school, that I wanted to do Soviet history, but I didn't speak, read, or I didn't know any Russian. And the university and your colleges support you into learning a language like from year one. So I was doing Russian in year one and year two, and now Russian is not the best, I will say that, but I have a reading ability, which was kind of my priority. I cannot speak. I'm really bad at it, but I can read. So I'm doing actually. I've been doing some of my primary source reading in Russian, and that was like kind of one of my long-term goals as a high school student. I was like, I really want to do some research on the Soviet Union in Russian, and Oxford is really strong on Soviet research.
So you've talked a bit about Soviet research. What were some of the courses that the Oxford degree provides, and also what are some of the ways in which you've been able to, I guess, interact with both the Soviet research, but also, I guess, the course in general and part of the curriculum that you do as a history student?
Yeah. So I want to say that Oxford has one of the best design kind of curriculums, because it gives you enough choice but also kind of forces you to do the fundamentals. And what I mean, you have a period requirement and a geographical requirement. So you do at least one paper, of one medieval paper, one early modern paper, and one modern paper. But after that, you get to really kind of design it as you want. And as I've said, I really wanted to specialize in modern European history, and especially kind of Soviet history. So I had the chance to do my further subject on the Soviet Union between the 1920s and the 1930s. And it was it was a paper designed around primary materials, and that was something I love, because I love working with the actual kind of raw primary sources rather than reading about them with from historians. So it was a paper that was kind of really designed around primary sources, and I loved that. And for my other paper, which was also kind of very primary source driven, I did a paper on Eastern Europe right after the Second World War until 1989. So, and I didn't really expect my research interest to expand beyond the Second World War, because I was always focusing on the 1930s. But then I got to see, okay, actually, this is so interesting. And within that realm of specialization, I will say, I really had the chance to kind of explore different avenues. And there's so many professors. And recently, I think when I was first year, there was a new kind of I think it was associate professor of Soviet studies, and he's one of my supervisors for my dissertation, and we really have a very close connection, and it was very supportive, and you get very personalized advice, because every student has very different interests, and he's kind of really keen to work on what you want to work on and give you very personalized and tailored advice.
That sounds like a very good introduction to what the course at Oxford is like. And we will have a second part of this interview where we're going to be talking a bit more about what studying at Oxford is like. We'll talk about more about how tutorials work, dissertations and stuff. So make sure you like and subscribe for that when it comes out. But let's move on to how to get into Oxford. There's a few things which everyone needs to do in order to apply: personal statements, the hat, and interviews. Let's start off with personal statements. How did you end up approaching personal statements, and what are some things you could do for it?
Yeah, I think generally everything is a matter of perspective. So I didn't want to approach it as, this will decide my whole future, because that's very intimidating. So I felt, okay, I want to write everything down in a piece of paper and kind of just let everything out from my head. And then I will choose what I think best represents me. What I want universities to kind of read and feel that they somehow know who I am. So obviously I was aware that it will be good to talk about kind of my further reading. So I didn't just base myself on, the school curriculum and my A-level history curriculum, but I was talking a little bit about theory of history, and I was talking about it's a very, I think, kind of retrospectively, it's a very standard book, but at the time that was what I thought was best. Cars, What is History, which is kind of one of the fundamental books in the theory of history. And I read it, I made notes on it, I talked about it. Sorry, but I felt that I needed to get my voice through. Why is that book important? Why is that kind of article important? And I really kind of prioritized getting my voice across, because I looked at the admissions kind of page and from the Faculty of History at Oxford, and it said, this is what we're looking for, and I kind of tried to match what they were looking for to my personal statement, but in a way that didn't feel kind of, very artificial. I wanted to make it kind of organic and to make sense as well. And I realized that a key component of the degree is having your own voice and being argumentative. So that's something I said, okay, I'm going to do that throughout my personal statement. And I tried in everything that I did and said to kind of, get my voice across. And as a high school student, I was really involved in a lot of extracurriculars, as we could call them. But I didn't feel that they all had a place in my personal statement. And I felt that I wanted to prioritize quality and kind of long-term commitment over quantity, because again, I wasn't talking to a prospective employer or something. I was talking to admissions officers for history. So I looked at the course website and I was kind of looking at the requirements, and I was like, okay, thinking about holistically, what do I need to be a good history student in terms of skill, transferable skills? And I said, okay, I really need time management and discipline. Kind of that extra push to uh, to go that extra mile when it comes to research, because you do get the reading list, but what is going to differentiate a good student from a great student is who goes that extra mile. And I talked about my debate commitment, because that was something I did over a long period of time, and I reached a point where I had positions of responsibility, so I could talk about how kind of I managed both the dynamic of me kind of training people my age almost, which is a key component of empathy and kind of understanding people and circumstances, which I think in history is crucial just because of the kind of the time difference of yeah. And I talked about my internship at a cultural foundation, where I was like exposed to a lot of medieval ancient and medieval kind of artifacts, but it was also kind of, it was still a cultural foundation, so it was not just about research, which was kind of research outside my normal area of interest, because I was focused on modern history, but I was doing kind of more medieval stuff. But it was also about kind of getting that research to the public, so you get all that kind of project management. We're doing a series of podcasts, and it was the kind of during COVID, so it was a bit challenging. So I got to talk a lot about, project management, resource management, which I think I could have related kind of well to managing the weekly essays and that workload component.
So you've touched upon three aspects that we can dive into a bit more: further reading, developing a voice, and also some of the role of ECAs. I think the role of ECA is always quite a controversial topic when I discuss to people at Oxford, because some people love them and some people hate them. But let's start off with further reading. You talk about the importance of having certain books in the personal statement, and that's something that I felt also was something which was very helpful for me. But someone who is maybe a high school student who is wanting to apply to history but doesn't know exactly where to start, how can they discover actually what to read for themselves?
Yeah, actually, the Faculty of History has some nice recommendations. But the thing is, I think that, and I did fall into that trap, and I did talk about, the very typical books, Thucydides, Carr, What is History? And like, thinking about it now is no, because I think that I read them for the personal statement, and it wasn't, I didn't treat them with the attention and depth and analysis that I usually treat like kind of any reading I do. So I felt that if I was asked about them at the interview, I perhaps wouldn't have felt as comfortable talking about them. So I think people need to start from their interests and try to see within their interests that's something they're really and talk about and read around that. And the faculty has some great recommendations about some general books, but and you can ask your history teachers at school, like, and sometimes the course itself is like some notes from historians. You can actually, from that note, see the book where it's coming from and maybe read a few pages. Because I felt what I did quite well in my interview was because I talked about the Soviet Union. I was really kind of glad because also my written work was on the Soviet Union. So it was something that I felt completely comfortable with. So my advice for people, and something that I did and was a mistake, was that I tried to kind of do something that I was not. You shouldn't feel obliged to kind of do the foundational, do this, do that. Talk about what and read about and do further reading about stuff that you're genuinely passionate about.
That's definitely a tip which is very important. I think having that kind of niche which makes you stand out is something which is very helpful. I remember I was talking to my philosophy professor and I was talking about my interview, and she was like, yeah, what stood out was that you were reading Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. It wasn't anything which was on the course at all, and that was something which can be very helpful. Now, you also talk a bit about having your voice. I guess someone who's listening to this might be asking, well, is that voice kind of the style and having the identity? Is that voice about the way you're writing, I guess, in more of a casual or formal sense? Like what qualifies as someone's voice in their personal statement?
Yeah, I think at some points you can be explicit about kind of what you think. Okay, I read this book and I can say, oh, I was inspired, I was motivated, but you can say, but I'm gonna give a specific example, like historian X looks at the social kind of conditions of let's say agricultural practices in Soviet Russia, which I found interesting, but I felt that it was kind of segregating the
Noise.
urban and rural areas in a way that felt out of place. It's just making comments about a certain work. It's about making sure that you're explicit about what you think. You can agree with something, but I think it's important to say why you agree with that something, or what you perhaps thought about differently.
Now, moving on from that, let's talk a bit about the role of ECAs. How important do you think they are, and especially that balance between academic and non-academic ECAs? How do you find how should someone approach it?
I think that for Oxford, being brutally honest, I wouldn't say they're useless because they do like well-rounded people. For Oxford, if I should give like a percentage of the balance between the academic parts of the personal statement and the non-academic parts, it'll be 80% for academic and 20 for non-academic. But what I mean is that the priority is that you talk about your passion for the subject and how you demonstrate that passion. And I think there is a fine line how you demonstrate the passion and some extracurriculars. I could use the internship at the Cultural Foundation to talk about how I demonstrate that passion. So that was like a little bit on the boundary. But talking about my debate, it shouldn't have been the priority for my history personal statement. It was 2 sentences, and I think that was more than enough. I think it's very tricky to get that sort of balance in the sense that I think people's like earliest drafts need to like talk about the extracurriculars in greater depth so that they refine it in such a way that it's specific to the subject.
Now, that's a very important question that people may have, and that's a very helpful answer. Now, moving on to something which is often very Oxford specific, the subject test. Can you tell us a bit more about what the hat is and also kind of how you can prepare for it?
Yeah, everything is a matter of perspective. So the history aptitude test is a source, and you have to read the source and kind of do a source analysis. But excuse me, the source is a bit long, and I think that's a challenge, and that's what kind of high school students are not really kind of familiar with. So the source will vary between a page to 2 pages. I think mine was actually 2.5 pages. So the key challenge is time management. You have to read the source, analyze the source, and write about it. And I think it's an hour. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I felt that, okay, how do I deal with this? It's obviously a matter of skill. What do I prioritize and how I write about it? But I think the key is practice. So I used all the resources on the faculty website, and I did all practice tests. And in that way, I felt very familiar with the test, even though every source was different. But I could see, okay, maybe I need to spend a little bit less time reading the source and a little bit more time on writing, or vice versa. It depends on every person. And I used to ask one of my history teachers to give me some feedback, which I found very, very helpful and very insightful, which, it wasn't always kind of the perfect advice, but it was always kind of something to think about. And therefore, I think practicing the hat as much as possible was really important. But I think the other most important component is that I didn't want to treat it as kind of the determinant criterion between me and university. I wanted to feel that I enjoyed the process. And I felt when I was enjoying the process because I was doing something I like, I was much more effective at it.
Definitely. Now, moving from the hat to the interview for the last kind of section of this interview, what is an interview like for Oxford University, and also how can someone prepare about it? What's someone's approach to it?
Yeah. Usually people have 2 interviews, and you get to talk a lot about a lot of different things. But I think in my year it was a bit of of a practice to have one interview, or kind of some candidates had one. So I had one, and my interview was split between an initial discussion kind of about my interests, which stemmed from my written work, which I had to send. It was like an essay on Soviet history, and then like source analysis. And usually you will get professors who are kind of as close as possible to your personal statement. I mean, in the things you express interest in. So my professor was focusing on modern European history. So he kind of read my written work, and it was very obvious that he read my written work. And he talked to me, oh, can you elaborate on that? So that was our starting point, and we started kind of talking about our written work in greater depth. And he was asking me, oh, what are you doing in school? And I was like, oh, we're also doing the Cold War. And I did some kind of background reading about my kind of interviewer, because you know in advance. And he wrote about the Cold War, and he wrote about the Greek Civil War. And I'm ethnically Greek, and like kind of we talked about that. So they really kind of try to find points of convergence, and kind of they will not try to kind of throw you off your game. They will not ask a person who is interested in modern history about medieval history. They're not going to do that. And obviously, you need to know your personal statement very well. So I did a lot more extra reading on what is history and Thucydides, because I didn't feel comfortable. Thank God I was not asked to those. But any point, like on your personal statement, like I think you should take it line by line and just like make sure that you can go into a great depth, especially the further readings you include. And then the next 15 minutes, the source I was given was like a visual source, and it was like an ancient source, but it was about kind of doing that source analysis. And I was really guided, because the way it worked was that I was kind of talking about it, and then she was giving me additional information. She was like, oh, what do you think about the inscription? The inscription is in, oh my God. The inscription is in this language, and this and that, and you get more information as you're going.
That sounds like some wonderful tips for the interview. Now, perhaps to end off this interview, going to a more of a broader perspective, if you are going back to perhaps your high school sixth form self, and you're telling them 3 tips that you'd have liked to know going into the Oxford application process, what would you tell them?
Well, I think it's important to kind of choose the further reading wisely, because it eliminates the stress. Keep practicing on the hat. It was a nice experience. And kind of really enjoy interview process, because I felt amazing, but I felt a little bit stressed. But it's, again, in hindsight, my interviewer was my supervisor for one of my 2 theses, and I know it just felt like a very kind of very nice full circle moment.
Yes. No, that's really nice. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel. I'm sure those who've watched this would have learned a lot more about how to get into history at the University of Oxford. In the next interview, we will be discussing how to apply, how life is at Oxford, and how you can adapt from high school to the University of Oxford studying history. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.